Welcome everyone. My name is Philip Phillips. I'm the Associate Dean of the University Honors College here at Middle Tennessee State University. Welcome all of you back to class, and I welcome any visitors that we have here today. We do have two of our deans. We have Dean Bud Fisher from Basic and Applied Sciences and our own Dean, Dr. John Weil from the University Honors College. And today it gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker. Dr. Janice Brickey is Associate Professor of Interior Design in the Department of Human Sciences and a member of the University Honors College faculty here at MTSU. She earned her BS from Virginia Tech and her PhD from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Her current research interests include learning systems and healthcare environments for aging. Dr. Brickey served with me as co-coordinator of the Spring 2013 Honors Lecture Series on Innovation and Design. She currently serves as a member of the Honors Council. She's also one of the most creative people I know. So the title of her paper today is Environment and Personal Place. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Brickey.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. So what is environment? So many people think of the environment and they think of the great outdoors. Let's get out into the environment. But I come from a field of study where environment means the built environment. And we look at design, as design as a discipline. We think of graphic design, we think of product design, and we think of environmental design. And my aspects of design don't only include the interior environments, but also the exterior environments and all of those different places where people gather and they associate and they define themselves. Because we are defined by our environments. Your childhood was defined by its environment. Your learning environment is extremely important. And in fact, a lot of researchers consider the environment the third teacher in the classroom. So I'm going to start this out with a graphic that talks about this and kind of reiterates what I just introduced to you. Personal place is based upon your life experiences. It's based upon your cultural orientation because it'll be different depending on what culture you grew up in. And then also, I want to introduce you to the idea that there are some generational things going on too. Then, as we go for the life experiences to define this personal space, we look at macro spaces. Now, this is the bigger environment, which is the world as we know it, different countries, different different continents, different ways that we look at the world because it's a perspective differential. But also, too, we look at macro spaces as buildings for people. Now, in my world, I differentiate between larger environments or what we call contract spaces or commercial spaces. And that's when we develop environments for multiple people to be able to use it. And that's when we get involved with codes and when we get involved with different types of ways that we have to design the environment to be able to accommodate that many people. And then we get into microspaces. This gets into residential design, and it gets into spaces within those larger environments that help us to define things. And then finally, we have these smaller gathering spaces. And an environment for me that's very important is how you sit in the space here, that you can turn and talk to somebody, that you have a chair that moves around with you, that you can look out and see different people because of the tiered classroom that you're in. And so this is looking at that smaller space in that smaller environment. It all has to start somewhere. And I want to dedicate this particular idea about personal space to someone that was very dear to me. This was my father at about 75 years old. This was over in North Carolina when they were opening up one of the major bridges going across the mountains. And as they went to look at that, because he always had to, check out all the road projects within a 250-mile radius of my home, he wanted to go out and have his picture taken in the middle of the bridge before they opened it up, because he thought that would define his place in the world. And this was a very important photograph for him. No wonder I'm creative. Recently, one of my good friends who's a designer, a professional designer of Nashville, she's working on an MBA at Lipscomb University, and they got an opportunity to either go to Poland with the MBA program or to China. And she said, hey, I'm going to China because there's so many things going on now that impact our design world. And so she spoke to my classes last week, and I asked her for a couple of photographs for this lecture. And the photographs from over 3,000 that made a difference to her. The first one here is looking over, I think it's Beijing, and it's the modern city with the old gargoyle and then also the smog. Because she thought the three together were so important to be able to see the old, the new, and then the consequences of the environmental change. Then this is, I think, going through Hong Kong or Beijing one, I don't have the context to it. But here in the United States, when we build big buildings, we use scaffolding. It's made out of metal, and they build it up in crossbars and stuff. In China, they use bamboo. And bamboo will go up beside large buildings, et cetera. And she thought that this was a very incredible picture because it could be New York City, and yet it's bamboo. So you can define the place by the use of bamboo, and it's not New York City, but it's China. And then finally, they got to visit a residence. And when they walked in, this captured her imagination. Instead of having just a window, there was an aquarium in the window at the kitchen. And so the one thing that she kept talking about was how they paid attention to detail, that little things kept repeating itself, and it was this understanding that the small personal spaces could be designed in order to be able to accommodate the larger spaces. And I think that these three photographs illustrate that there's certain things that are done in China that are different from the way that we would look at things, but also, too, they define that sense of place for China. Symbolism is very important for place. And if you've ever been to New York City and seen the Statue of Liberty, and the whole idea is that people would come in and they would see the Statue of Liberty and it would beacon them that you were coming to the United States. Now, it didn't mean that they actually got to come here and stay because there were people who were deported back for various reasons. But I think it's very important to look at New York City as that place that people associate with the United States. And so I took a couple of photographs from the New York City tours that we do with interior design. And this is from outside the church, and this was the sculpture to one of the trees that was uprooted with 9/11. And for all of us that live through it, and as we get into younger and younger people coming into our classrooms, I can't ask them, where were you when you heard about 9/11? Because I know that you're coming into the place that you were in first or second grade, and you were sheltered from it, because that's what we do. We shelter our children. But I've talked to other students, and I said, where were you? What was the impact? And over the years, I've gotten this more and more people who are talking about how it affected them personally, instead of what they learned from their parents, et cetera, over time. And then finally, I'm going to show you something down at the bottom. This is a church right across from the site where the people, the firefighters, the rescue workers were going in and they were resting in between their different shifts. They used George Washington's church pew for the podiatrist because there were people who donated their time to work on the feet of the people who were going over the rubble and whose boots were melting in place. And the reason they did that is George Washington often wrote about how he felt for his troops during the battle for independence because they often did without shoes. And so this connectivity to place and symbolism is extremely important. And it's part of the way that we associate ourselves as Americans. Times Square. Oh, it is New York, and it's one of the places that people often want to visit. But when I was there with my family about 3 years ago, we were sitting on the steps, and around us, I think I heard at least 10 different languages being spoken. And so it's that place where you're in the United States, you're part of this, but you are connected automatically to all these other cultures and all these different people because of their language, because of their dress, because of their perspective, because of what they're eating, because of what they're pointing out as they see the skylight go around them with all the different advertisements and stuff. And it's really, really important for you to understand that even in a large space, you can still have that sense of place of who you are. Personal space is a sense of space. And for me, personal space, I use a definition where personal space is everything that's in this range of which we use. And it has to do back to proxemics. If you study that in psychology, that Edward Hall gave us the 18 inches, the 3 foot 6 inches, and then up to 7 feet, and then up to 14 feet. And I could go on and on about that. I can do a whole lecture on hospitality design and the use of proxemics. However, when we look at proxemics and we look at that space, we're looking at that area of what we're comfortable in. And remember from that slide I was talking about small personal spaces? Those are the places where we connect ourselves to the environment. And those are the places that make a big difference. This is at Murphy Springs, and someone said that this was one of their favorite places of the group. But it's going down to the children's area. And every time I've taken young children there, they love it because it's big, and there's snakes, and there are flowers, and there's frogs, and there's everything else, and even a raccoon right now. But as you go down into the space, they really love these stepping stones that are out in the pond because they're smaller, and you can be safe stepping out on the water. And it's about the size that they appreciate. And it has to do with that personal space. It has to do with that size of the environment. Also, when we get into personal spaces have meaning to people. And I think it's very important. If you've ever been to Chicago and downtown in the Loop, if you go and you visit this area, this is their war memorial. And back behind the fountain, they have the names of all the people who have sacrificed in various wars from the Chicago area or part of a memorial. And I think it's very important because even though this is a very hallowed space, it's a very sacred space, then the city goes on around it and people give people their space around it because of the steps and the way that it's designed. And it's a really wonderful evidence of an environmental space in a big city, and then the space comes down smaller, and then it gets smaller, and it can be very, very personal. And especially with the fountains and the running of water, you get that sense of connectedness to something that's live and going, the spirit of the people. Here in Murfreesboro, if you have not discovered it, we do have a national park, and it's the Stones River National Battlefield. And on any given weekend, and especially in the summertime, you see people from all over the Northeast, from Michigan, from Ohio, from Indiana, I'm trying to think some of the other, Wisconsin. They're not only here because they're Civil War buffs, but they have family that died and were buried here. There's a significant number of Northern soldiers that were buried here, and Southern soldiers too. But you see so many people, and anytime you go there, you'll see people from a lot of the northern states here visiting the battlefield because they had someone who fought in the battle. And I think it's very important that here in Murfreesboro, we still have this connectivity to another part of our country. Another place that we can get a sense of connectiveness, and we look at the greater environment, a lot of people talked about going out into nature. And one of our great things that we have here in the state of Tennessee is the state park system. And I've been very fortunate to work with them on looking at how we can change the state parks to reflect your generation, not just the people who traditionally go to the state parks for conferences, etc., but they want the state parks to go on and be with your generation. Part of this too is very important to me because if you look at the upper right-hand corner, a lot of the people who lived in areas, as they started to dam up and they started to acquire the land for the state parks, a lot of people were displaced. And so one of the things that human scientists, the old human ecology people, part of my numerous degrees, has to do with this idea of sociology. And there were people from my college at UT that went and documented the stories of the people and found out what it was like for them to be displaced and moved to different areas of the country or displaced even 5 to 10 miles away because of the situation with the building of the different lakes. In our state park system too, north of Nashville is Montgomery Bell State Park, and is the place where the Presbyterian Church was found here in Middle Tennessee. And so the stone church is still there. People have weddings there. It's in part of the state park area. And then always with the state parks, most of the inns and conference rooms have a view of the lake. And a lot of these lakes were created by the WPA or the CCC during the Depression. So we have this sense of history with place. Even though we go there to enjoy these places, then there's a connectivity back to the history of what the state parks have done for us. Now, how many people are from Murfreesboro? Can anyone identify what this is? It's the geographic center of the state. It is our Washington Monument, no, an obelisk. And it is, urban legend says that there's certain things that you have to do in order to leave Murfreesboro. We won't get into that on TV. But the idea is that this is the geographic center of the state. That's the reason we're Middle Tennessee State University. We're in the exact center of the state. And that's the reason when we have the sport events that come into town and people coming here, the amount of growth that's going on in this region right now. And so this is a very specific place, but it gave us our name. This place gave us our name, Middle Tennessee State University. Murphy Springs is also a place that means a lot to me. And again, there was one of the respondents that said this. And it's where Murfreesboro used to get their water. But before that, or within that time period and everything else, it was the way that, because the water was there, it was part of the reason that the town was located, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there's part of the history that you learn in behavioral geography and history. More commonly to me, I came here in 2006. And you remember that photograph of that man out on the bridge at the very beginning? Okay. He wanted to see where we had moved to. And he was up in his 80s. He was like 89. This was several years before he passed away. And he wanted to see where we were in Murfreesboro. And so when we were here, or when he was here, excuse me, we walked along the pathway and we sat at the benches right around the corner where the edge of the park is, and you go across this bridge. I couldn't get back when he was passing away. He was in hospice care, and it was a 6-hour drive. There's a lot of things going on, treacherous weather, etc. I went down to those benches, and every time I go by those benches, I think of us sitting there, and I think about me going there for that peace that I needed when I couldn't get there. It's a very important sense of place, and place becomes something that's very sacred to us because it's a connection to people and part of our own personal history. Place is a very significant place for healing. This is at the the St. Thomas Health Center, and it's the outside of the chapel and the inside of the chapel. And I wanted to include this because in times of distress, like when people are in the hospital or even in times of joy in the hospital, people often want to give thanks, or they really want to get to a place of solitude to be able to reflect and pray. And I think it's very important that this is in the center of the building. Gresham and Smith Architects out of Nashville designed the building. But I think it's very important that the arms and the river, or the water that goes around it, surrounds it, and it's a circular space because there's no definition to it. There's nothing to say that this is a narthex with the church, etc. It has this definition of being around, encompassing, almost like arms coming around the people as they come into it. It's very important to have a sense of place in healthcare design. One of the things that we have found over the last few years in evidence-based design, which again aligns with evidence-based medicine, is that we have found that people heal faster if they have a room with a view, that their hospital stay is reduced, that their time within that space is reduced, but it's also that they heal more completely. Okay? So this idea of having a space to be able to see out, to be able to heal from, is very important in the healing environment. Okay, my son is here at MTSU in a dual enrollment class, so I can't use pictures of him for place anymore because someone might recognize him. So I referred to the dog, all right? But our dog is a rescue beagle, and she had a sense of place from the very beginning with us. And it's really funny because when she first met my dad, and this is a picture of him, she would stay beside him. And she would come up and sit beside him in his chair. And even when we go visit him in the assisted care, she was right there with him. She always felt like her place was beside him. Then these are some pictures in our house. She has a pillow that is hers, Okay? No one else gets on this pillow. When we take her for a walk, there's 1 yard that she always does this in. And then also, too, this is a big chair in our backyard, or our back porch, excuse me, that used to be my chair. I used to read in it. I used to grade in it. I used to study in it. No more. When she comes out, that is her chair. This is Gypsy's world, and she has a sense of place. Now you go, a dog, what does that equate to people? Well, a lot of dogs have the intelligence of somewhere as in the emotional attachment like of a 2-year-old. And so you're talking about an animal or a creature or a living being that has a sense of place. It's something that's built into us, okay? Okay, one of the things that I found in all of my time in looking at this, because I've been studying sense of place since my graduate days at UT, is that there's a connection between family and creating that sense of place. Because remember from the graphic I said life experiences and life changes. It is so important for parents and caregivers to get young children out into nature, into places, and to give them the experience of what these things are all about. And so I asked permission with this gentleman who had his 2 girls there, and they were pointing out all kinds of things to me because they had been linking with their father, and they thought it was really, really cool to be there at the Discovery Center. And so family and nature connections are very important. Well, that's pretty universal. If you're familiar with the Knoxville area, in North Knoxville is a place called Fountain City. And years ago, there used to be a trolley train that came from downtown Knoxville, and there was a hotel there. And the springs were supposed to be healthy, and you're supposed to go up there for a period of time. It was one of the vogue things to do back in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Now it is a park. And when we moved to Fountain City, one of the things that I noticed is that you would see people fishing, you would see people walking, you would see people walking with walkers, you would see young people there, you would see families feeding ducks. But then, beside the park, or this is where the lake is, this is a major road that goes to 640. I did this by hand 25 years ago before computers were really, really good, so please bear with me. And so this was the Fountain City Park, and this is the duck pond. But just beyond a couple of buildings here, and it's like 2 blocks, there's a whole nother park over here that's below the trees. And people would go back and forth between the two. There would be people fishing, and then they'd go over there for a picnic, or they would come over here and do something. Or there are people who just went and walked around the yellow here, which was part of the trail around the larger park. So in behavioral geography class, I did a Saturday pilot study, and I went back and forth between the 2 locations, and I asked people if they'd been here before, why they were here, their age group, what were they planning to do, and just a series of studies. Nothing that I actually documented through human subjects, it was just to do a pilot. But what I found was that it was really, really interesting because there were so many people, especially at the duck pond, and then certain parts of this, that had come there as a child. And they wanted their children to have the same experience. And so the importance of parks is that it gives you a sense of space, and it also the place that you continue with your children in those aspects of play. There were grandparents teaching their children to fish here. There were people that were there was even a wedding that took place over in the gazebo. So there was this whole continuum in a park within an urban part of a city that was very important for that sense of place. Elder care and place can be very important too. And as part of my research and some of the things that I've studied before, I've looked at different types of places. I'm going to share 2 different installations with you. The first 2 pictures from your left, these are at a veterans home down in Gulfport, Mississippi. And we were allowed to document everything. I was there with a tour with the Environments for Aging conference. But for me, it was so important on how important it was. When you first walked in, he had all his diplomas and all of his rank. He wanted everyone to know who he was. It was very important in this place that everyone's rooms were basically alike as far as the design of it, for you to know who he was. And then around his bed, I thought it was so, the dichotomy of this is that you have these diplomas and everything that's very, very important as far as the Navy and his background. And then around his bed, he had all the flowers and the prints. And he wanted all the softness around him. And I thought that was really, really interesting, the difference in a small room for an elder at a VA retirement home. And then the other picture down here, a friend of mine down in Montgomery, Alabama, is a professional healthcare designer. She won an award for a health center and retirement home for one of the tribes in that area. And she was very nervous about the artwork, but the tribal leaders came forth with quilts and pictures of the powwow and the history and various pieces. And when it came into place, it just all fit in beautifully. And it gave everybody that sense of community. And now they're even using the dining room for lunches, for different activities in the community, because everyone has that sense of place with the artwork and that connection back with their past. When I was talking about the different sizes of environment, I went into residence. And so I'm sharing with you two pictures. The one on the left, it was our home in Knoxville. It was on the National Register of Historic Places. But one of the things that when we moved here, we had it was being shown while we were adjusting to our life at MTSU. And our realtor called and they said, the realtors are complaining about your house. I'm like, okay, what's the problem? No one wants to leave. When they take people there for showings, they want to sit down and they want to stay. They love the front area and they'll go back to different places, but they'll come back and they'll want to stay in it. And I was like, oh, well, that's nice. That's a compliment. It's not selling it, but that's really, really nice. And what I started looking at is that Christopher Alexander wrote a book back in the 1970s, 80s called A Pattern Language. And he looked at homes in Europe and other areas of Europe and in Brazil, those homes of people who had European descent. And when he looked at these different residences, there was a portion of spaces that if the entry area went into a room where there was light coming from a western direction and there was enough light during certain times of the day that it was very inviting. And then you have a series of spaces that you would go from the living room to the dining room to the kitchen. And the kitchen was visible from the front door, but also there was a back door entrance into it. And people would go in the kitchen and they would just sit down and stay because we had painted it almost the color of my jacket today. But people felt that it was so warm in there all the time. It wasn't dark at certain times of the day or even at nighttime when they do showings. It was always a lively, engaging kitchen. And then all of the private areas were back to the back. So what Christopher Alexander was talking about is that in our residential spaces, kitchens are extremely important because it's where families gather and where people want to feel comfortable. But also, too, in the living spaces, you want spaces that have light to them and that people feel like there's nothing that's glaring to them because the windows in that room were high up and then the rest of them faced a northern direction. So there was always a quality of light. It was a very pleasant room and people always wanted to stay. So Christopher Alexander here, and then over here is our house, and this was several years ago when it was when we were completing it back in '07. But I wanted to show you an empty room because the one thing that I've noticed as an interior designer, I've had people say, "Oh, I don't want you to come to my house. It's horrible. I need you to come to my house. Please, I want you to come and I want you to fix me." And I'm going, "Well, how long have you lived in your house?" And a lot of times people, when they first buy a house, will want to get a designer in, which is good, don't get me wrong there. But I always want people to live in their house at least 6 months before we start to do anything to it. Because you don't know how you're going to live in that house. You don't know what you are going to like or not like. Does anyone have a chair that is part of your background and your history that you take with them? Does anyone have a favorite pillow or comforter or a picture or something that's part of your environment here that you wanted to bring with you from your home environment or a previous environment? But sometimes once you get into your new life, you don't want it anymore. And if you have to work around something like that, it can be very difficult. So as a professional interior designer, I always tell people to live in it 6 months. Another thing we do as far as campus design sometimes and is that we wait to see how students will create pathways to go to class before we will put in formal sidewalks. I'm been so happy, thank you, that the science building's open because I park at the library parking lot and now I have a straight shot to my building. But it's this whole thing about how easy is it to get from one place to the next. And several different universities wait until the students have at least a year of classes or at least one semester to see how they're going to cut through to get to this place or this place because it's more natural. We go back to that behavior. We go back to what's comfortable for us. So, place is a frame of mind. This is actually a model study that was done. And it's just to give you kind of a reference point that sometimes things are not what they seem. So what I did, there were about 21 of you that met the deadline. Now, there were probably 13 or 14 that met the deadline by Friday, and then there were several that submitted things by midnight of last night. If you submitted something to me today, your date is not included, and so therefore I don't have you reflected here. But we can do a show of hands so that we can see where people how people associate with this. So my first question was, what was your earliest memory? So who are you? What do you see? Who are you as a group? My earliest memory was that when I was about 3, and I have a couple of memories that are around that period of time, but the one that's so dominant is I'm the youngest of 4, and my oldest brother was a 6'3" football player, and we went to the Outer Banks of North Carolina. And when I had to walk up the steps, but my gosh, I had the thrill of my life going down. He put me on his shoulders, and I got to go around and around and around and around all the way down, and I could see out. It was wonderful because my perspective had changed. Okay, so I remember that, and I also remember going in my church, going up to the sanctuary one time, and they'd added on to the church, and I thought it was so strange that they had brick on the inside. Because as a child, I thought brick only belonged on the outside, and here it was in the inside. And why did my church have brick on the inside? You know, it blew my mind as a 3.5-year-old. Okay, so earliest memories, I thought it was very interesting. Out of the 21, and if it says 0.5, that means that the person gave me a couple of different answers, and I was trying to divide it up and represent it. But I had 4.5 people name a city. And I thought it was very interesting. All of the cities were not in Tennessee. It was like someplace in California or someplace here. So there were like 4.5 people that named a specific city, someplace that was different. And it was nothing else, it's just that I remember being here. And I thought that was kind of interesting because it's saying not a place in particular, but an association with that macro environment that's a little bit larger. 5 people said home. And they just said home, my house. It was a very, kind of short answer from that standpoint. 3.5 people specified a specific place at home. One person said their dad's truck, and I thought that was really cool because a lot of times dads will take kids and do things, take them out the truck, while they tinker and everything else, and it's kind of a safe place to keep them. The other thing that I thought was interesting is someone talked about the willow tree at the house that they had before, and then the second house were the clothes in the laundry room. And I thought it was very interesting because to me, the clothes hanging down are like the willow tree branches. And so there was the outside to the inside. And I thought, oh, this is really cool. This is a cool association. Unusual space, we had a museum. We had oil rigs or the oil tanks at a father's workplace. We had places that were very uncommon from that standpoint. One person said that they remember an ice storm. And I thought that was very interesting in the world that we live today, the impact of catastrophic events. In 2009, when we had the tornado that came through and there was a woman and a baby killed, that's close to my neighborhood. And I remember they had the sign up that the baby had been born like in January, and they hadn't taken it down yet. And I remember driving by that morning, I thought, when are they going to take that down? And then that was where the tornado hit. And so to me, every time I go by there, I envision that sign. It's something that was unusual about that place. And then one person said outside. And then two people specifically mentioned bedrooms. And I think this is important because it's one of that more intimate spaces. And we go back to what Christopher Alexander said about the pattern language. The bedrooms are the spaces where we define who we are, and that the most sacred room in the house is the master bedroom, because that's where the parents gather together, but it's also where they take care of family. And so this whole idea, somebody even mentioned their parents' bedroom, and I thought that was very significant because it talked about, to me, that talked about the closeness and the proximity. Play as a child. We had playground, and that was 2. 1.5 people specifically mentioned dirt. I can get into that. 3 people said their neighborhood, and they talked about riding the bicycles and that sense of being able to be mobile with their friends. 4 people said the field or outdoors. You know, they were saying going outdoors, but it was specific to being able to play in the field at the edge of the neighborhood, or where you could go out and you could be in the great spaces. And then we had the woods. We had the backyard. We had several people talk about barns, whether it was with horses or their grandparents' barns or being, you know, involved with animal care. We had one person that said library. I wasn't sure about that. No, I'm just teasing. I mean, I remember going for story time, and that was very, very important. And I would go every 2 weeks and check out books, even before I could read. I thought that was interesting. And then one person said the computer, and at first I go, oh, but computer games. And there's so many cool ones for children. I remember taking my son off of them, and they even had him in his daycare. And then someone said just a small space, and it had to do with a specific place that had been designed for children, like a tree house or a playhouse. And then another person had said outdoor and water. So I put water there as something specific. And so you can see that a lot of these are outdoors, aren't they? And playing outdoors is very, very important. And it's become less and less safe for some kids to play outdoors. I mean, we go more into these neighborhoods and they're more sterile from that standpoint. And I think it's one of the things that your generation can change, that neighborhoods become places where children can play again, hopefully. Study location. Oh my goodness, it was all over the place. But that doesn't surprise me, because you know what? Those things, the previous 2, your early memories and the place you play, that was defined by someone else. That was defined by your parents or your caretakers. This is defined by you. And it's defined somewhat by your personality. Because more introverted people need quiet spaces to be able to study in, and then other people need places that are louder. So, you know, let's look at this. So we had a student union, we had a library, we had a dorm room, we had bedroom floor, which I thought was very interesting because it's getting down to a certain size of space which you can control. And then a desk or a table in the room. And they were specific, there was like a desk here, a desk there, but they didn't talk about the room, they talked about a location to study. And then a study room at Lyons, which is one of the apartment groups. Parents' loft, room with no distractions. And this is where we're getting into people that want to be able to concentrate when they're studying from that standpoint. And there was a coffee shop, gym, and that was a part, no, 2 people said something about, no, only one person did 0.25, so they said gym with a couple other places. The other thing I thought was really interesting is a couple people specified that they like to study in a quiet room, but they want a view to outside. They wanted to be able to see outside when they went to study. And then the room at home, and they were talking about their parents' house specifically. And then alone, and then also a very small room. So if you can see, we're starting to look at larger spaces like the student union, the library, the dorm room, and then specific areas. Now, when I collapsed things down, it became even more interesting. Because what we started seeing was that the student union, the coffee shop, gym, 4 people to the library, 4 people to a room with no distractions, outdoor views, a specific place in the room, and then a specific type of room. Okay? So when you get down to studying, you're wanting these spaces that become more and more to your scale, your size, what you want to accomplish, etc. Okay? There's still people who like to study at the coffee shops and the places that are more noisy. There might be some correlation to being in a larger family. I'm not sure. I didn't have a chance to look at the data relative to that, and I didn't ask anything about family size. Okay, now, if you were all over the place to study, you were definitely all over the place to relax, okay? Horse farm, rock climbing, near water, outside, car at sunset, listening to music, discovery center, forest or park, hiking forest, and they were very specific. I want to hike where there are no other people. Room with music, just a room, a living room, a desk chair, and I thought that was really cool. I like to see that chair. It sounded like it was a lot of fun to study in. And then hot bath, all right? Bed, their Knoxville home, their house, playing a video game, or their front porch reading. And so all of these, how many people can relate to at least 3 of these? Oh my goodness, see? You have something in common, but yet everyone had something very specific to say. Now, relaxation place. 8 were outside, 2.5 were connected outside, and 10.5 were inside. Go back. All these different places, I started collapsing them down. And I started looking at the data from the standpoint of what was definitely outside and what would be some kind of connection outside. And I put rock climbing in there because I didn't know whether it was indoor rock climbing or bouldering out, side. So the thing is that it looks like you're still going for places that, and I didn't have a time to correlate the data from your earlier ones because of the timing on this, but I wonder if there's something about where you like to play as a child and where your relaxation is now, right? One other quick story. When I was in graduate school, I have a cognate in child development, and I was studying, even at that point, the impact of elder care and also aging with grace. And I was looking at several different studies and different types of perspective, and I got into reading some work by Erickson. And he was talking about the importance of play and play across a lifetime and having that playful personality, kind of like the guy in the very beginning. So I conducted a study for a class, and it was just in the class contents. And I interviewed two couples. They were both, one couple was in their 80s, and one couple was in their late 70s. And then I interviewed 2 women who were widows. Okay? And I asked them, where did they play as children? What was their concept to life? How did they feel about work? Just some general questions. And we got into this qualitative analysis. What I found was that there was this sincere effort and joy in life that was part of that play. One couple in their 80s that had been married 56 years, he still had things that he was pulling on her at that age. Okay? He started talking about putting a string around a June bug and being able to fly it. And she goes, you never told me that before. And he goes, I still have a few tricks up my sleeve. Okay? They wrote a cookbook together. They did all these things. He was with Extension. She was a home economics teacher. And they had this glorious life. And they were able to endow a big scholarship for people to go into those types of crafts and arts. They had children that became doctors and pharmacists and college deans. But they still had that sense of play all those many years. And they even went into elder care together, into one that was graduated toward their needs. The other couple, he had been married before and his wife had died, and he talked about how much he wanted to share with her about his play and some of his experiences, because they'd been married about 10 years, and they were talking about how important it was for them to play. One of the other ladies I talked to, she was working on her EDD. She was like 92. She wanted to finish up before she died, and she had been a Russian orphan in an orphanage in Russia, and they used to make them play to keep from having to feed them. And so her association with play was work, because if she played, then she could get to eat, okay, because she associated those two. So she and her husband had a very successful restaurant business. Your sense of place is defined by your life experiences, okay? And wherever you came from, and even if you didn't participate in the survey that we submitted to you last week, I'd like for you to look at it and take note about where what was important to you as you were younger, and be able to record that information that you might be able to share it with people in the future. Because you might think your life is not very important, but your children will, and other people that you will know in your lifetime. And that's my human scientist talking. The other part that I want to leave with you is that it's cultural. Just as I shared with the things about China with my friend who went there, and things that were very different from that standpoint, your life will be engaged. You are part of a tribal society that's global, more so than any other generation that's ever been here because of technology, because of your ability to be able to see things and to do things differently. And I think it's very important for you to have this understanding of place so that you know where you came from and where you're going to go. And then finally, I want you to think of a personal place and all of these things as a way that you create your environment that you're most comfortable with. So as you study, as you go through your years here at MTSU and on beyond to work environments, graduate school, and other things that you do, make sure that you always have a place that is yours. Because that sense of a personal place is extremely important, because it's the place that you rejuvenate your creativity. When Dr. Phillips said that I was one of the most creative people that he knows, I'm one of those people, I overdo. I try to do this and I try to do this. And I teach interior design, so our classes they meet for 5 hours a week, so we have studios. And so sometimes I just need to get away. I just need to get away to that personal place. I'll go to nature, I'll go to my back porch when the dog's not around so I can sit in my chair. And I will also engage within those people around me. I take my music, I do things to be able to rejuvenate that, because you can't just bring creativity up. You've got to be able to pull it from within. And to pull something from within takes that sense of place. And that's what I want to leave you with. Take your creativity, take your abilities, and go and conquer the world. But always keep something sacred in here. Thank you. Are there any questions?
We've got a little bit of time, so please ask questions or share comments.
Let's do a little informal. Let's do something informal here, because those who didn't participate. How many people? What were some of your early memories? Someone that didn't participate. I don't know who you are, so I can't say anything, okay? And no one else will know.
Yeah. I'm not in the class. You guys, you think it's good family. But I have a memory of riding a bike that wasn't mine, and falling into a pool that wasn't mine, at a birthday party that wasn't mine either.
but it stuck with you, right?
Yeah. Well.
Yeah, especially when the water association. Anyone else? Yes.
I remember the day my sister was born, which I was 2.5. I remember walking down the hallway with my dad in the hospital in Murfreesboro. Yeah.
And those life changes. Those are things those are those major events. Yes.
Well, I was actually one of them. I was the one about the ice storm.
Yeah.
And I was like 4. I had a pretty late first memory. And the thing I remember is there's a 160-foot and 180-foot poplar in the front yard. Just 60-foot one, there are branches 15 feet falling off hitting, almost hitting.
And see those significant events. It's you probably even feel the cold of opening the door sometimes, because the sensory thing becomes part of who we are. When I think about going down the lighthouse, I think about the saltwater smell and being, coming in the windows and stuff. So no, that's very significant. Anyone else? Yes.
One of my earliest memories, I was like outside. I was probably only like 3 or 4. And my mom was just showing me this like huge spider web, and she was like, "Look at that!" And it was like a big crab spider, and she's like, "You don't need to touch that." And that's all it is. Yeah. It was like, just so vivid.
Well, it's vivid and it's different because it wasn't there before. Yeah. And don't touch that. Don't touch that. How many times did you hear that growing up? Okay. Anyone else? What about places to play? Did I not touch upon your place to play as a child? Did anyone have any other place to play?
My favorite place to play was always at my grandfather's house.
Yeah.
That's where all of my family from pretty far away. That was always the meeting place we go to.
And- Yeah, and then the whole big, there were always all the cousins and everything else around. Anyone else have that kind of memory? Favorite place to play, to be able to get together with the extended family? Okay, what about, a couple of people mentioned playgrounds and those types of things, but did anyone create, I created a store in our basement. I wanted to do, you know, I was going to be a clerk or something. I think it's because my older brother worked at a store, and I thought it was really, really cool that you got to handle money. Okay. Anyone else? Anyone play with plants? Did anyone do something interesting? Did you do something for other people? Okay, what about places to study now? Did we touch upon most of the places that you like to study? How many people like a quiet room with no distractions? How many people like to study to music? How many people like to study with a room with a view, an outdoor view? How many people have like a favorite like layout that you do? Okay. Yeah. You have to study this way. You study this way for chemistry. You study this way for English, right? You have a different, situation. Okay. What about how many people like to color code things when they study? All right. Okay. Yeah, really good. Statistics is really good to do that. Each time they explain something, you get a different color, and then you can follow the steps. Okay. Finally, what about leisure spaces? Did I not touch upon? Does someone have someplace else they'd like to go? How many people like outdoors? How many people like an indoor space? How many people want to be alone when they do this? Yeah, because it's that regeneration and to be able to get that space. Okay, well, I thank you. If you have any questions, if anyone needs any more information, I have my cards and I will take emails. I won't accept any more late questionnaires because I won't have anything to do with them. But I do appreciate everyone who participated, and thank you for your time today.